Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Poison Pen and welcome to the virtual book launch for James Rollins and his wonderful new collection of stories in a brand new novella called Unrestricted Access. So, Jim, a toast to you.
Yay!
Yay! We can do that.
Ah, some water.
It's supposed to be champagne, but he's already blown my whole...
It's champagne.
Right.
It's gone flat.
It is water. So I would like to say, I'm Barbara Peters, and I would like to say that you may be wondering why we're doing this way. And one, we thought it would be great for people to see the store. Excuse me. And for another, since I do the events at the Poison Pen, and you can't do them masked, I am tested frequently at the Mayo Clinic here. And so I don't pose an actual threat to anyone. The rest of our staff is in mask. Jim has been in a mask working away until right now, and we are indeed the requisite distance apart. So, Jim, Unrestricted Access, what impelled you to decide to collect your previous published stories and then write a super new novella for Tucker, Wayne, and Kane?
Well, I had written about a dozen short stories over the course of my career from beginning to end, this newest novella. And I began fielding a lot of questions. People were asking, is The Pit a novel? Where is that? I don't have that in my collection. So for the James Rollins completist out there, people are trying to fill in the blanks. And it's oftentimes when you're cruising around the internet, it's hard to tell whether a short story is a novel or whether it's a short story.
Yes.
Plus, they're hard to find. I did a short story for George R. Martin's Anthological Warriors back a decade ago, maybe a little longer than that. Now it's hard to find. You have to commit to buying the entire volume to get that one story. So I posed a question to my publishers that, hey, can we just do a little chapbook, put all the stories together? Because at that point I didn't even count them. I just thought I had maybe 5 or 6 stories out there. But then once I actually gathered them all up, because I did a sort of little YA fantasy short story for an R.L. Stein anthology, and once I gathered them all up, my publisher said, this is almost as long as one of your Sigma novels. I was what I was going to be doing, still tiny thing.
Look at it. In fact, if you turn it this way, it is the same size as a Sigma novel.
She said, can you do also, why don't we just release it as a proper anthology rather than just a chapbook? Because I thought that's all I had, short story-wise. And so we decided to do the book and said, can you do a introduction to the anthology? Oh, yes, of course. I anticipated I was going to do that. But then I got thinking, why don't I do introductions to many of the short stories? I realized that the short stories are sort of a track across my career from beginning to current day. And by doing the introductions, multiple introductions throughout the book, it allows me to sort of look back. It gives me a chance to look back, why did I write the story then? What might I have done different? Where did the story originate from? Things that I never could share with an audience before until this moment. It also allows me to sort of give a roadmap through my career. I could reflect on it. Hopefully readers might appreciate that a little bit. But I also said, I'm uncomfortable just, selling this classic stuff that's already out there in various formats. It might be hard to find. Why don't I do something new? And I had been to Sedona, Arizona, and I had this idea. It was in my idea box. I think we talked about that before, where I gather history and science and throw them in a big box. And I had a bunch of pictures from my trip to Sedona. I remember I wrote down a line from somebody that was doing a Jeep tour for me. He was telling me that, all these crystal munchers are out here, and I didn't believe any of them until I lived out here. Then one day I was out in the desert with some friends, and all of us all of a sudden got goosebumps at the same time, and we felt this weird energy. And I said, I don't believe any of that stuff, but all of a sudden I experienced it. So that's really cool. So I put crystal munchers, added to my little idea box, and threw it away, tucked it away. And I'm thinking, I'm going to do a new story, and I thought, well, I've got this sort of idea that doesn't really fit in a novel, but would be perfect for a new Tucker and Kane novella. So it's a big story. It's almost twice as long as any other story in the collection. So it's a big adventure. It's where Tucker faces a major trauma in his life.
He does, and it's almost like an existential crisis. But but it's real, induced by events in Afghanistan, and it's hard to read the end of it without a tear forming in your eye.
Be warned.
But before we get to that, I want to talk about an earlier Tucker and
The first Tucker.
Kane's, the first one, exactly. And before we do any of that, because Jim is here and able to sign all the books, I'm going to have to walk over here to show it to you. But I'll hop down, and I'm hoping you can see it, is that he's actually drawn a doodle of Kane in all of our copies, as well as signing them. And just to be authentic, Jim, I am wearing Sedona red.
How appropriate.
Right, I wore, oh,
We need them.
we do need the microphone, okay, sorry about that. I'm wearing a Sedona red dress because the red rocks, the geology of Sedona is so distinctive, and is something that Jim talks about, which we'll get to. But what I think would be interesting is that you had it in your introduction to the first story in here, which is Kowalski in Love.
Also, love you.
You mentioned why you wrote it, and at least I think that was the one where you wrote about George R.R. Martin had asked you, have I got the right story?
No, that was the pit.
Was that the pit? Okay, sorry, I read them all in a big hurry again last night. All right, so let's talk about the pit, which is a dog story, but not a Kane story, and why you wrote it about that dog in an effort to, I don't want to say stand up, but stand up for George R.R. Martin. Would that be better?
Yeah, the anthology I was writing that George R. Martin invited me to submit a story to was Anthological Warriors. And the conceit of that anthology was they were asking each author to write a short story or novella about a warrior. And that was could be a warrior in the past, could be a warrior in the future, could be a current day warrior, just a warrior of some sort. And I had read a lot of books like Watership Down, which often play to do with rabbits, and I thought, it would be fun to do a warrior that's a dog. And so my warrior in the pit is a dog that is kidnapped and becomes coerced into a dog fighting ring. And it's sort of a redemption story of the brutalization that occurs to that dog and the path to redemption for that dog. So that was my story.
Brutalization is no exaggeration. I'm here to tell you, it really is brutal what happens to the dog. And of course, there's a play there in that it's a pit bull, right?
Yeah.
Dog forced into the pit. And again, there's a child that loves his dog. So it's a really interesting story. But I thought it was fun when you said that you conceived it, and in order to have an entry into George R.R. Martin's volume of Warriors.
Exactly. I mean, I wanted to do something different. And I figure everybody has to be a human warrior, so I'm just going to do something very different.
So why not?
Exactly.
All right, so let's go back to Kowalski in Love, which is the first one in
It's
here.
the first short story I wrote that got published, I should say. There's a bunch of short stories that have never been published that are buried in my backyard, but this is the first published short story.
So you have a compost heap of short stories?
Yeah, you don't want to read those. But it was what I found with short stories are a struggle for me. It takes me almost a month for me to write a short story. I can get a good chunk of a novel done in the course of write a short story. But what I found with short stories is I can fill in blanks. And I mentioned before about I had this idea for the trip to Sedona and some things I learned during that trip that I could or didn't really fit in a novel, but would be great for short stories. That became Sundogs, the new story. But Kowalski in Love is that Kowalski first appears. Joe Kowalski is sort of he's a former seaman, a little bit of a gorilla of a guy, maybe some secret talent that might be buried very, very down, very, very deep. But he first appeared in Ice Hunt, my standalone novel. But I liked writing him. He was fun to write, and I thought it wouldn't be fun to sort of bring him into Sigma. So all of a sudden he's just in Sigma. And what I realized is that I never really explained how, this a bit of a gorilla, a grunt of a guy, ends up with this elite covert special forces scientist with gun team. So I decided I was going to write how Kowalski encountered Sigma for the first time and got recruited. So it allowed me to fill in the blank in the history of Sigma and also explain something that was left unexplained until that point.
Which is really worth reading. And also, I should mention that these stories allow you to do a lot of traveling. So Kowalski in Love, in fact, is on an island, which can be well, the Brazilian Navy is not far off, let's put it that way.
Exactly.
So, you know, it's great that one can move around. Now, another story that I found personally fascinating, because I have been there, and in other catacombs, is one, and, you know, I still don't know, is it Sachin or Sichin?
Seishan is the way I pronounce it.
Thank you.
However you pronounce it is correct. I
Okay,
just pronounce it Seishan.
it's always tricky. Anyway, Sachin is in Paris, and there's a cult that may be doing something really horrendous, damaging to the city, and in order to figure that out, there's also somebody who's been kidnapped. They have to descend into the catacombs of Paris. So you wrote that with so much authority. Have you actually done that?
Oh yeah, I went, again, it was one of those things I traveled, that was not thinking it was going to be a story, but being, you know, a caver and a spelunker, you know, there's no way I wasn't going to go to the catacombs when I was in Paris. So I did the official tour, sort of the show tour, but then I found out from speaking to one of the curators of that, you know, if you want, I know some people that can take you to other places. So I got to see some other places, not quite as extensive of what you probably read, because I did some research for that, but again, just all I want to say the story, I just didn't know what it was until Seychelles gets into a bit of mischief in Paris.
So you will learn from this that there is actually a sort of police force called Catacombs, who look after this region, and then there are people who are called cataphiles, and they are people who spend a lot of time there, have actually set up like a movie theater with popcorn, do all kinds of fun stuff. I remember when you went on a really massive diet so that you could become so slender you could fit into any, remember that? When you did your carbohydrate thing?
Yep.
And it was so you could actually slip into caves and things without getting stuck.
Yeah, I took caving up in college, and I did it after, for several decades afterwards. But I got to be about 50 or so, and I thought, maybe this is a younger man's sport. Plus, I was getting a little wider in the midsection, so I thought maybe I better just sit on the sidelines and vicariously experience this. When I went to these grotto meetings, these grottos were the caving clubs, and men and women would get up there and they would explain about a certain cavern. They pick pictures, they have diagrams, they explain how they traverse the cavern. Fascinating stuff. I always loved still going, even though I wasn't really actively doing that, because I thought I was just, over 50, 36 waist, just not gonna squeeze in those tiny little chutes that you have to get through. The rule of thumb is the boot rule of thumb of caving. It says if you can get your boot through a hole, you should be able to get yourself through that hole. So, not with a 36 waist. So I'm sitting there at this grotto meeting, and this gentleman comes up and he gives this discussion about the cavern he just traversed, and all the diagrams and pictures. It was very challenging, a lot of rope work to get up and down that cavern. And this gentleman was 65 years old. So I'm thinking in the audience, okay, this is just an excuse. If I really love caving, I need to get in shape and to start doing it again. So that was the impetus, was to get back in shape.
Right. So Jim and I are out to dinner at one of our favorite restaurants, and suddenly he's not ordering the things that I thought he would order, and so I learned all about caving. And now when I travel, I send him photos. I sent you one from the Iron Gorge, in fact, coming down the Danube. No, up the Danube, because it drains into the Black Sea. Right, up the Danube. And we passed a particularly great cave, and all sorts of people who were, gathered there to go spelunking, and also I sent Jim photos as we traveled, so he can see all that. But the other thing I thought was really worth pointing out is that in the Catacombs of Paris, there are large collections of human bones, skeletons that have been dismembered and stored there. I ran into my very first collection of that in, believe it or not, 1976 in Lima, Peru. In the cathedral there is an ossuary below the cathedral where favored people could be buried. And what they do is they bury them, and then when all the flesh is gone, they would move the bones down into the ossuary, and they would arrange them tastefully in bins of thighs and concentric circles of skulls and all the rest of it, which I thought was really creepy, and decided right then on the spot that I was going to go for cremation better burned than wormed, as we say. But here's what I also found out on subsequent visits: the number of bones in the ossuary in Lima was reduced. And I thought, that's really weird. And it turns out that there's a superstition, if you will, that if you build a new home, a new structure, that it's good luck to take a bone and bury it under the threshold or under the wall. So people were doing raids of the ossuary, which really reinforced my decision to be cremated. But in your story,
did anybody watch Poltergeist? Didn't they learn from that?
But in your story with Sejan, in the catacombs, you revealed that in fact this has also happened in Paris.
Oh yeah, I mean there's very macabre decorations with these bones. Like one of the things I saw was this bone throne. It was like a throne made out of bones that was assembled, you know, in the past. Just the weirdest things that they would do with the bones down there.
Well, in this particular case, the skeleton can be weaponized. Really good thing to know. Now we're going to move on to Budapest and the very first appearance of Tucker, Wayne, and Kane, and we have some photographs to show you. But once again, there is perhaps a cemetery and so forth.
For some reason, I always go to cemeteries. I don't know what that is.
It's like a Halloween-themed story or something. Anyway, just to orient you in Tracker, which is a perfectly wonderful story, page 155 of this book, you can turn straight to it to meet Tucker and Kane, because you will want to read that before you read Sundogs at the end. Patrick, can you show the photos that we have there of Budapest, just so you can kind of see? I have lots more photos of Budapest, but I picked these just to give you the idea. Now, this is a view from Buda on the, let me think, must be the west bank of the Danube. And that is looking across the famous and beautiful Hungarian Parliament building. This photo is the Matthias Church and the square, which is where Tracker kicks off and is a very important thing. And there are always groups of tourists around this monument, and you can see the church behind it. So keep that in mind. And then one more. This is in Pest, and this is at kind of the far reach of Pest. Now, Pest is the city on the east side of the Danube. Buda is constrained because of geography. It's on cliffs, and so it can't really expand. It's where the castle, fabulous museum, all kinds of great stuff is, and the Hilton, which is an important element in the story. But yeah, I love that. When I first went to Budapest, that was the hotel I stayed in, and it's wonderful because it's part museum and part kind of ruined and part hotel. But Pest, on the east side of the Danube, is in a plain, so it can expand forever, and it's much bigger, obviously, than Buda. And this is a square at kind of the far east of Pest, where there's 2 or 3 famous museums, and there's various things going on there. But it gives you an idea that it's much more like 18th century, much more 19th century grandiose when Hungary was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire than Buda, which is really quite medieval. So that sets the scene. So tell us about Tracker. Why did you come up with Tucker, Wayne, and Kane? Thank you, Patrick. That's great. Well,
I had already written the pit, which is all that story. Also is from the point of view of for the most part, the point of view of the dog. And so I enjoyed doing that. It would be fun to return to. So doing some story that had that point of view of a dog. And then I had done a USO tour in the winter of 2010 to Iraq and Kuwait during the tail end of the Iraqi war. And me being a veterinarian, I saw handlers working with their military war dogs, and I was really curious about them. So I got to talking to them. I discovered the sort of the intimate bond that these handlers have with their dogs. I kept hearing the same phrase over and over again. It runs down the lead, which was a shorthand for that over time they're so bonded that their emotions and their understanding of each other travel up and down the leash that connects them, so they can almost read each other, understand each other without any verbal or hand signal. So after that, I went to Lackland Air Force Base and learned how they train these dogs, learned what the capabilities were, talked to many more handlers. And but I wasn't quite sure what my entry point into that storyline was. So at first I was writing just from Tucker's point of view, and then I thought, well, that phrase that runs on a lead kept going through my head, and I thought, why just write from one end of that lead, one end of that leash? Why don't I go to the other end of the leash and do parts of the story with the dog's point of view? Now, I didn't want to do a Disney version of the dog where the dog breaks out in a song halfway through the story. I wanted it to be authentic, to really show what these four-legged warriors can do. Looking at the behavior, the training, and sort of incorporated that all into trying to create that character. But I wanted to practice it first. So Tracker was my first attempt at introducing that character, to seeing if I could write them well. And I was satisfied with them enough that I ended up recruiting them into Sigma, as I often do. So then they appear in my novel, a Sigma novel Bloodline, as a support team for Sigma. And I haven't really revealed this, but I'll reveal this now, is that Tucker and Kane are coming back into next year's Sigma novel, the Kingdom of Bones. That's one of the reasons why they're also reappearing here, is just to reintroduce the readership to Tucker and Kane, and so they'll be appearing alongside Sigma in next year's book.
I am so pleased to hear that, because you made me very nervous when you kind of indicated, or at least I thought you did, at the conclusion of Sundogs, the novella, that it was their last appearance, and my heart went, oh no, I really like them. So, not their last appearance.
Yeah, so there's more to come.
And you gave them 2 books of their very own.
Right, I spun them off into, they were a little reluctant. I mean, Sigma really wanted them wanted to recruit them, but they were, they're too independent. He was sort of a lone wolf type of character, and did not want to. It was not a team player when it came to recruiting into Sigma. So I spun him off, and Grant Blackwood and I wrote 2 novels featuring exclusively just Tucker and Kane, no Sigma really in them. The Kill Switch and Warhawk.
Warhawk, yeah.
So that was a great deal of fun. So now they're going to come back in the Kingdom of Bones, next year's Sigma novel, as again supporting Sigma in their latest venture.
So there's some tech that works. I mean, even though you're running up and down the lead, you've been very careful to give Tucker and Kane some tech to operate with. One's a camera, and one is a microphone.
Yep.
And I gather that this throat microphone, you don't have to speak aloud. You can.
Right. They have a new thing called a molar mic, where it's all basically with bone conduction for means of communication. Communicate silently, but still be heard by your partner.
So when they're traveling together, so to speak, Tucker can see what Kane sees, that the microphone is up. The camera is raised.
Sort of looking over his shoulder. And this is something I learned from the handlers too, is that they always get this weird double vision, because they're seeing with their own eyes, but at the same time they're communicating with their dog, who's maybe off further out in the field, and seeing through the camera eye and hearing the dog's huffing and puffing, and able to communicate to the dog commands wirelessly. And that also merges them, where they almost become sympathetically, almost in sync with each other when they're working the field. They're almost 2 individuals becoming one.
So it's a little scary, as might happen, for example, in Tracker, when the technology goes down due to various circumstances, and then you have to wonder what's happening. But anyway, Tracker takes place in Budapest, and it begins in that square that we showed with the Matthias Church and then the statue. And what happens, because I think it's a really interesting way to start. It's really a Jack Reacher way to start a story. It's exactly
he's basically, they're it's just him and his dog, wandering the world, and they're in Budapest, and they notice a woman that passes them by, and it seems that they notice somebody seems to be following her, and she seems to be oblivious that they're being followed. So they intercede, and they get pulled into this adventure with who's hunting her and why, and how can they help.
Right. So they actually end up in the church, which I thought was kind of, I was worried that you were going to do some destruction inside the church, which is a wonderful.
For
church.
me, it's a good worry. I think I destroyed most World Heritage sites at this point.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of collateral damage to both people and buildings in your stories. But anyway, the church survives. And they wind up in Pest, which is one reason I mentioned, because in order for the story, which we're not going to spoil by telling you why, but they need to range further afield, and they end up in Pest. And I've often thought, I always wished that Stephen Saylor, who wrote these wonderful Roman mysteries, I was always sad that I couldn't persuade him, and I really tried to get him to write like one in Roman Budapest, because Romans tended to build cities at fords of great rivers, and the chain bridge, which features in your stories, this magnificent bridge. There's several magnificent bridges that go from upriver, downriver, whichever way you want to call it. In Budapest, the chain bridge is the most famous one, and if you tour it at night, the bridges all light up, and they have different kinds of lighting. There's LED lights, and then there's sparkly lights,
which the Romans didn't have.
No, but I've always thought that there were so many great. There are a lot of great Roman things that you can find in the museum there.
The history there is fascinating. That's one of the reasons I decided to set this story there. Is that I'm just fascinated when I travel, learning about the history of these places, because they're just layered. There's this civilization built on this civilization,
exactly.
On this civilization, and as you delve deeper, you just find more and more stories. It's almost like a book unfolding.
It's absolutely true. In the museum over in the Buddhist side is I think one of the really great historical archaeological museums. It's cut down into the bedrock, and I really, really like it. I have to ask you though, because it's a really tough language. You don't actually. No. There are a few words of Hungarian in the story, but I figured you had some help in putting them in there, because I think it's an impossible language if you're not born to it.
I'm going to try that one.
Okay, so that was Tracker, and that's where we met. Now, is there another story before we get to Sundog? We have Tracker, we have 2 novels. Is there another place that they appear?
That is it. So they've only appeared in 2 stories, in Tracker, where I sort of introduced them. Then they appeared in my Sigma novel Bloodline, and there's 2 spin-offs, and now they're sort of a pivotal resolution to a major trauma in Tucker's life is somewhat resolved with the course of that story.
So Sedona, talk to us a little bit about the geology of Sedona, because that's an important feature of Sundogs.
It is. Again, the red rocks are quite famous, and there's a lot of theories on why they seem to be drawn. People are drawn to those red rocks, and there's the theory that there's these vortices or vortexes, which, by the way, is a whole controversy in and of itself. Whether should you call them vortexes or whether they should call them vortices? It took me a while to figure out what am I going to call it in my book. There's a whole war going on.
I did wonder, because I thought you would have actually picked the other word, so I was going to ask you about that.
So they, what is the scientific theory behind why they might be happening? The fact that it seems to these experiences go beyond just new age mumbo jumbo. There seems to be a basis behind that. So I was really curious about that. So I did a lot of research behind the geology, what crystals are in the rocks. Could that be the source of this energy? So it's fascinating to research on that. I don't want to tell too much more because it gets.
No, we don't want to spoil the story. If you go up to the Grand Canyon, Sedona's not that far from the Grand Canyon, you will discover that the reason that, how often when you look at geology, you find that the strata of the rock are on an incline. They're not this way, but they're often this way or more tortured. And yet the Grand Canyon, the strata are horizontal and fairly steady, and also true of much of Sedona. And there was, I think it's called the Colorado Plateau, which is thought to have all sort of risen at once, and therefore has weathered through wind and water erosion and so forth. But you don't have these different plains like you often get. So Sedona, it's there's sandstone, because that's the pale stuff, but there's a huge amount. Isn't it iron? Isn't it ferrous oxide that makes this?
Makes it red. The
red I'm wearing. And so there's a wonderful trip into Sedona. You can drive through it, but the Verde Canyon Railroad, which leaves out of Cottonwood, I'm doing a little travel commercial here for Arizona in case we never travel again. It's like the Silverton train that goes from Durango up to Silverton on the Compass. No, that's a different one. Anyway, I love all these trains. I've taken them all over the West. But the Verde Canyon Railroad will take you into Sedona in a way that you can't drive, and you get
It's a beautiful trip. I did
it
that.
really
I did that
is,
trip, too.
and you pass like right under the rocks. But I have to say that I never felt any strange vibrations, or
I did not either.
maybe the train interferes.
Well, I mean, I hiked through Sedona. I took a Jeep tour, deep into the
Pink Jeep, right?
trying to see if I could experience that, but maybe I just was not in the right mindset to
However,
experience
to
it.
be fair, in the story, you're not actually in Sedona. You're out in the
Yeah,
wilderness.
we're in the Sonoran Desert, near Sedona.
Right. So there's a lot of wild territory out there. Sedona is like so many places. Mass tourism has largely overrun it and overbuilt it.
Yeah.
And
It's still beatable, though. The rocks are stunning there.
well, it really is. And the other thing is that there are private properties that were grandfathered into the canyon. So there are, it's an interesting patchwork of public and private land. Oak Creek running along through it. I often recommend it to people. There's a nice loop you can drive out of Phoenix to go up there. And unlike the Grand Canyon, where you have to hike down or ride the mule down in order to be at the bottom and see it, if you're in Sedona, you are at the bottom looking up. So it's a different experience than standing on the rim of the canyon looking down. I love it.
So I went to Sedona, like I said, years ago, and then during that same trip, again, using that loop we were just talking about, I ended up at the Sunset Crater National Park.
Right.
And that was featured in my novel Devil Colony, that park. And so I had some friends with me, so I wanted to show you where parts of Devil Colony took place. So went to the park, and there's a booth where you have to pay to enter the national park, and I'm waiting in line just to get my ticket, and finally get to the front, and the gentleman is checking me in, and he looks up and goes, "Are you James Rollins?" Yes, I am. So yeah, we pass your book all around. All the national park employees here read your Devil Colony.
How wonderful. Yes, I mean, I think Sundogs is a wonderful story for all kinds of reasons, which we're not going to go into as spoilers. But I really, I'm trying to remember another thriller that might be set in Sedona. Patrick, can you think of one?
Well, I know Chris Neary did a couple of them set up there.
Okay.
Didn't J.A. Jance, some of her books, aren't they?
She
set up
might
in
the
that?
Allie Reynolds ones.
Yeah.
There may be a couple of them that
It's a
are.
great location, and I'm surprised more people haven't.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, it's relatively small, even though it's now overgrown, and so it's hard to imagine a significant number of criminals or whatever that, you could lard into Sedona to make it.
You could see someone hiding out there,
You
though.
got a lot of badlands out there.
Yeah.
You got places, a lot of nooks and crannies to hide.
Witness protection program
Exactly.
kind of thing.
Well, you could. That's absolutely true. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is that you have, in your novels, you like to write what's true and what's not, author notes. And so in this, were they originally there, or have you gone back and added the what's true, what's not to the back of the stories? Because you really can learn from Jim's stories quite a lot of great historical and scientific and veterinarian stuff.
A few of them were already there, and a couple I added. My publisher asked me, "Hey, why don't you do another what's true, what's not for the story?" So I did, which I did also for Sundogs.
So in the book, we have new introductions, and we have new what's true and what's not, and we have the first Tucker and Kane story, and then we have Sundogs, which is their whole novella. So it's actually a wonderful package.
I think it is. I think it's a lot of fun. I hope people read Sundogs, because it's my goal is to refresh their memory about Tucker and Kane, because they will be making a reappearance.
But I think if
It's
they
March.
haven't read Tracker, that they need to start with Tracker, because
it's
I
a-
had
it's
not
good-
read
it's a good
Tracker.
introduction to them.
Yeah, I was fascinated with it. Let me look over here at Patrick and see if we have questions.
Yeah, I do.
Do you want the microphone?
I don't think so. I mean, this is where it needs to be. Well, Jim, question just off the top.
Sure.
I know, how do you approach short stories, as opposed to novels? Working with that shorter canvas. Obviously, they're shorter.
Yeah, they're different. the difference between writing a novel and writing a short story is like apples and oranges. They're very two different birds. Some people think, oh, it's just like a short story is like a chapter in a novel, and not really. It's you got to pack a lot. In the introduction, I talk about how hard short stories are for me to write, and I go back to my one of my early English teachers were explaining that with novels you have a bounty of words in which to tell your story. You have many pages in which to go through subplots and explore the intricacies of your characters. Whereas if you pare down a story into a short story format, you got to remove a lot of words. You have to be leaner and tighter. And me, being the verbose writer that I am, and the fact that I have tendency to read, the more the novel the doorstopper, the better I like it. So my brain is wired epic, so it's hard for me to tone that down into a concise package. And then of course she says, if you pare it down even further, you end up in poetry, or taking that whatever concept or emotion you're trying to evoke into even fewer words. I will never be a poet. So
the collected
haikus
of James Rollins.
Not me.
Have you ever discovered that when you're writing a short story that, hey, this could be a novel? Has a short piece turned into a longer piece?
And I'll use the Tucker and Kane tracker. Like I said, that was my first sort of foray into can I create the characters so that it feels authentic? Do I enjoy writing it? How is that going to feel? And I enjoyed them so much that I ended up pulling them into their own story. And then again, I wasn't satisfied with that either, so I expanded, pushed them off into their own novels too. So, I'll tell you how I shifted from writing. When I first started writing, I thought, I'm only writing cracks in time. I have a narrow window as a full-time practicing veterinarian with my own clinic. So all I thought I could fit in my life was short stories. I had only cracked the time to write, so I thought I only could write short stories, little tiny stories that fit in those cracks. And I had written a short story, and it was for a magazine called Realms of Fantasy, which was created and edited by Marion Zimmer Bradley, a fantasy writer who did Mists of Avalon. It's probably one of the most famous novels. But I'd read a lot of her books growing up and was enamored with her. So I submitted a story to her, and she kindly rejected it. But she sent me a personal handwritten note, which actually, it's a treasure of mine in my office, a certain handwritten note. And she basically says, Jim, I could tell you can write. You are a writer, you can tell a story, you got like your prose. But fundamentally, I don't think you're a short story writer. I think you are a novelist. I think just from reading the story, I just sense that, you want to, you're restrained by the format. Yeah, I can see that you're trying to break out of this. And I realized that, she was right. I don't read a lot of short fiction. Short fiction was, again, still hard for me to write, even when I was beginning to write. And so I took her at her word, and I stopped writing. At that point, I'd written probably 14, 15 short stories that are buried in my backyard, like I'm never going to see the light of day. But based upon that letter from Marion Zimmer Bradley, I stopped writing a short story, and I wrote my first novel, Subterranean, and ended up selling it. So.
Okay, let's see, I have a couple of questions from Kelsey, who asks, first, do you have a favorite of the books you've written? And second, is there a location that you would love to set a story in that you haven't done yet?
Yeah, I like each book for different reasons. Oftentimes people ask me, if I wanted to, what book would you recommend I read first? And the book I always target towards, because it's not a part of the Sigma universe, it's a standalone, so you're not sort of burdened by the weight of the series, or you just want to see what my writing's like, is my book Amazonia. It's set in the Brazilian Amazon forest. It's a crazy adventure. It's the one that's always optioned by Hollywood. There's some strange creatures that appear in the novel. So if you like Amazonia, you'll probably like my other books. And it answers also Kelsey's second question, which is, where would I want to visit again? I would love, because I base that basically on like a 4-day little jaunt from Manaus. I would like to spend like a month and really. Have you gone to the Amazon before?
Only from the Peruvian side, so but you can't do the whole thing. You're either in Peru floating around.
Yeah, Peru is one side, then the Brazil.
Right, or you have to go upriver to Manaus, which was a has a fascinating story all of its own with the rubber tree. You know, the stealth raid by the botanical gardens in England to get pods from the rubber tree and create a whole rubber industry. I love it.
Being a veterinarian, you know, the Amazon forest is just rife with
Right.
you know, biology and life and evolution happening as you're watching it. So I would really like to spend more than the 3 or 4 days that I was allowed into the forest. I'd like to go back there.
Do you know that Manaus was an epicenter of the cellophane industry?
No, I did not know that.
Somebody wrote an entire book, which I now cannot possibly remember either the name of the book or the name of the author, but Manaus was this boom town because of cellophane, and they had its old opera house and all this great stuff. You know, somebody asked not long ago, I'm trying to remember who it was, we were talking, and said that the word crinkle has basically disappeared from the English language. Nobody knows what crinkle means, and I pointed out that's because we don't use cellophane anymore. You know, we're in plastic, and plastic does not crinkle. But you know, it's interesting about words, how they can fall in and out of use because of, you know, other
Like
circumstances.
crinkle. Don't lose crinkle.
Well, now you can bring it back. Okay, more questions?
A crinkle in time.
There
No,
you go.
wrinkle in time. Okay, so Stephen asks, he says, been a while since the last update on TV movie. One teaser a while back was big news soon. Anything to share?
Unfortunately, I can't share anything still. So sorry.
Okay.
Something's happening. You just can't tell us what.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay.
I interviewed Christopher Paolini, who did Aragon series, and I asked him the same thing because he's a new science fiction novel out right now.
Yeah.
It's a great book, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. And I asked him, do you have any film bites? You know, we're going to see the crew of the Wallfish on the silver screen, and did the same dance that's so familiar. Well, I am not at liberty to say anything right now.
Well,
Unfortunately,
and
they want to release everything first, and what's the holdup is that nobody's been filming for almost a year.
Yeah.
So everything's been put on hold. So, as is the announcements, because they're not going to announce something until they can start filming something. So they get to announce it first.
Yeah. All right. Tori asks, when you write your books, what comes first, your story idea or the research to discover the story idea?
It's a little bit of both, and I explained this before. I collect little tidbits, you know, those historical mysteries, pieces of history, and a question mark, something I can solve over the pages of a novel that I'm looking for, bits of science that let me go, what if, where's that going next, and I just, you know, sift through them every now and again, and just by happenstance, they end up on my hand at the same time, or as I'm sifting through, they end up on the floor at the same time next to each other, and then I begin to see, oh, well, there might be a story connecting that history to that science, and then I'll do some research and go, no, I'm wrong. There is no connection. I can throw them back in the box or get rid of one of them, or because of snowball, and then I know that's the story. So it's a little bit of both. It's a combination of a bit of serendipity, a bit of research, and then once I sort of compare that science, that history together, then the story begins to unfold.
Okay, Zachary asks, he says, in all the other signing discussions I've had with Jim, he must know you, he's always said that he includes at least one thing that scares the life out of him into his stories. Interested to see if there are any tidbits, inclusions in this anthology that really stand out as scare the hell out of you. Kind of interesting.
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's the. I think all authors are working through things when we write our novels. So the old phrase, you know, a writer is naked on the page. We expose a lot more of ourselves than I think we realize when we write a story. So we're always, you know, whatever. I always tell people when I teach writing, write from a point of passion, write what excites you, write what you love to read. And I write thrillers, so I'm looking for things that thrill me. So things that terrify me, I'm going to figure it's probably going to terrify you. So again, with a short fiction, there are many little tidbits. Again, a lot of those ideas I was talking about, the history and the science, not big enough to become a full-fledged novel, but they're just perfect for a short story. So there usually is something that really scares me, buried in each of those short stories.
There were several things that I thought were really terrifying in these stories, just as a reader. And there were also some things that really just sort of grab your heart, as I said, especially with Sundogs. So, you know, it's interesting that you can do sentimental and terrifying all in the same story.
Actually, I have a question. You know, a lot of us are afraid of, you know, snakes or spiders or Does being a veterinarian cure you of that? Because it doesn't.
No. You know, I always tell people, you know, I had my clinic was small. It started at 1,200 square feet. Eventually, it grew to 3,600 square feet during the course of the 15 years I was practicing. And I always told people, because I was training both large and small animal, and so I said, if you could fit it through my front door, I will see it. You want to walk a horse through my front door, I will see your horse. You want to bring a cow through that front door, I will see your cow. Do not bring a tarantula. So one day, somebody brings in a tarantula. It had lice on it, which is just wrong. You know, here you have an insect living on another insect, which just grosses me out. So it just gives me the willies. I still do not like spiders, especially tarantulas.
Are you okay with snakes?
I'm totally fine with snakes, because a part of my product was exotics. That's why they brought the tarantula to me, and so I like doing exotic lizards, you know, pocket pets, snakes. Totally fine with all that. No tarantulas.
All right. Let's see. Raul Garza. He says, hello from LA. Question for James. Have you considered weaving Mexico's Cave of Crystals into a story?
You know, I've got a whole folder on that. It's just fascinating. Those are gigantic crystals in this really hot cave. There's a story there. I just can't find my way into it yet. So one of these years I'll find my...
Is that in Copper Canyon in the Sierra
I
Madres?
can't remember where it's located. It's been a while since I looked at that folder. But yeah, there's a story there. I mean, the pictures are amazing. And I saw a documentary about that cavern where they were doing some research in there. The whole, you know, they were only allowed to be in that cavern for a certain period of time because it's so hot. You can only go in there. You have to be able to fully in like a hazard suit, and then you're only allowed to be there for a certain period of time because it's so hot in that cave.
I thought many caves were really cold. What is?
Not this one. This one's really, really hot.
That's
It's
strange.
full of these gigantic crystals. I don't know.
Actually, you know, a question for both of you guys. Since Barbara's traveled so much, do you find, you know, you mentioned about the kind of the spiritual vibe in Sedona that some people claim is there. Do you find that when you go to places where a lot of violence has occurred in the past, you know, if it's battlefields, if it's... I get a strange feeling when I go down to Bisbee for some reason, because I know there's so much that's happened in that area. Do you kind of subscribe to that notion that places can kind of contain the, you know...
I do. I think there can be that negative energy that'll occur in sites like that. I always think that, you know, we are energetic beings ourselves. You know, we are basically, you know, even though we look more physical, I have the whole book about how, you know, if you took out all the empty space in a human being, you're about the size of a marble, or it's actually solid mass. So most of us is energy. So I believe that you can pick up on that energy. Now, have I experienced that? Yes, but I don't know if it was truly that or the fact that I know the history. So I know what happened there. So I'm just creeped out because I know I'm walking on, you know, territory that was either a battlefield.
The trenches in World War I.
Yeah, I could say
knowing
that-
the history, I think, was what's generating the goosebumps, not necessarily maybe in the energetic vibe that's emanating that's affecting me.
Right.
I find that I go out of my way to avoid them. I've been to around Hiroshima several times, but have never actually visited the memorial and the whole bit. There are other things around Hiroshima that are interesting. And in Nagasaki, which was also a site of the bomb, although people died from radiation, it's a very different feeling because the geography of Nagasaki is canyons, and the impact of the bomb was therefore dispersed. It just destroyed Hiroshima, which was flat. But in Nagasaki, it was the radiation that was the killer, but it was far less destructive. So most of the old bits of Nagasaki survived that. When I've been in Vietnam, they will take you to see, you know, or Cambodia, they will take you to see killing fields. I've never wanted to go. But I think you're right. It's because being an historian, I've already read up on it, and
It affects you.
yeah, I flinch away from it. I don't see any reason to spend, and I don't honestly know whether the place itself or the geography would spook me.
Yeah, Joe Lansdale has a book called Lost Echoes, which is all about that phenomenon.
Yeah.
You know, it's specifically in buildings, though. You know, buildings where things have happened.
Right.
Yeah, interesting. Let's see here.
I've told you the story before, but the house I moved into a couple years ago, you know, I got this weird vibe. You know, that goose pebbly something is watching me type of feeling in the house, and this place is haunted. And then, you know, I'm going to check with my realtor who sold me this house, this haunted house. So, you know, he goes, oh, so I pick up the phone, I'm talking to her. She goes, oh, so did you see the ghost? She just out of the blue tells me that. And I didn't even volunteer that I was feeling this weird thing. I was probably just checking this. I was just checking in with her. And what do you mean? He says, yeah, you know, that your house was had a feng shui energy expert came to your house, the owner before the owner that you bought the house from, and determined that yeah, your house is haunted. There's a spirit in your house, and it's a spirit of a raccoon. So apparently at night, you know, there's some raccoon that's haunting my place, that's looking for whatever garbage I leave out that he can get into. But for a veterinarian, how appropriate it is that I'm haunted by a house that has a raccoon.
So here's the thing I can tell you from travel, which I find since you brought up ghosts, I've always found fascinating. When we were in Xi'an years ago to see the Terracotta Warriors and so forth, there are still some mus and so forth in Xi'an, although I think under present China they're eliminating mus and Muslims with fair regularity. But we also were acquainted with the moon gates, and you've seen those circular gates often in Chinese paintings and so forth, and there's a sill because you have to step over it to step through the moon gate, and the reason it's that way is because ghosts are unable to do that. So the moon gate is basically there as a ghost blocker, which I thought was really fascinating.
It's fascinating.
Got a good question here. Let's see. I'm going to blow her name here, but Teodora Georgieva. Hope I got that right. Hello, Jim. Greetings from Bulgaria. I know everyone always talks about the Sigma series, and I love them, but my favorite books of yours are the Sanguine series. I love the mixture of religion and fantasy. What was the experience like writing in collaboration with Rebecca Cantrell compared to working on your own, and do you ever want to go back to that story, or do you think it's complete as it is?
A lot of questions.
Yes.
Yes.
I can reiterate if you need
No.
me to.
Well, it goes back to your question about earlier about where does your ideas come from? Where is it research or is it and this was a bit of serendipity in that I was at a museum in LA and they had a Rembrandt exhibit going on there, and they had the painting "The Raising of Lazarus," and I was just fascinated by that painting because it's very macabre. It's got some weird symbology buried into it, and so I got to talk to one of the docents about that painting, and he told me this painting is one of three. They did 3 versions of this painting. We'll have one of them here at our museum, and there's 2 other elsewhere in the world. And one of them, by the way, was recently being not renovated. Restored. And they found out that in the picture of Lazarus rising from the grave, in that picture, you can actually see blood. There's like a little crimson paint dribbling from the side of his mouth. So I got thinking, well, obviously then Lazarus being raised from the grave he's a vampire. He's just fed. He's got blood on his lips. So I started doing research on vampires and Catholicism and these strange sort of parallels between the two. And the story began to snowball, like I told you before. These things begin to build. I do a little research, it builds bigger. But again, it's sort of more of a gothic, macabre type of story, and I don't really write gothic, macabre type of stories. And so I thought, this is such a cool idea. I don't want to ruin it by trying to tackle it myself. But at that time, then I was reading Rebecca Cantrell's latest Hannah Vogel novel, and it just happens like this is just what I'm sort of the way she's describing. And her stories are set between World War I and World War II, so they're historical mysteries, great stories. In Germany, so read them. But the flavor I'm getting off this book, just what I envisioned for the story idea. So I called Rebecca and I said, Rebecca, and I know Rebecca since early in her career. I gave her one of her first blurbs. I met her at a retreat I was teaching, and I said, Rebecca, I've got this idea, and I was wondering if you'd want to collaborate with me on it, if you want to work on this together. And she goes, well, what's it about? And I go, well, it's about vampires. She goes, no, not at all. But I laid out the history, the mythology, and this, and then eventually, she began asking me questions. And I know, I've intrigued her enough. And eventually, she said, "Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Let's do that." So we never collaborated before, Rebecca and I. She had never collaborated with another author. I never collaborated with another author. So it was a big, steep learning curve. You know, we would talk every Monday via Skype and exchange chapters and critique each other's work. And initially it was you try to be polite initially. You know, it's that awkwardness of, you know, Rebecca, I see what you're trying to do in this chapter, and it's really cool what you did, but maybe this one section could just be tweaked a little bit. And then it was like, got down to the point where, like, Jim, this chapter you wrote suck, rewrite it. Once we got to that level of honesty with each other, the writing became much faster. There's pros and cons to collaborating. Obviously, if you're writing your own books, you're the judge, jury, and execution of everything happens. Writing it's a collaborative work is a bit more writing by committee, because you got to sort of checking with the other author. But the great thing is that you also have two heads to solve the problem. You got two brains to solve the problems. So I'm notorious for painting my characters into corners, and then I'm like, Rebecca, need some help. I put these characters right here, and she's like, why'd you put those characters right there? Because it's cool. I don't know how to get them out of it. Well, I don't know either. Well, that's perfect, because if neither of us know how to get them out of that corner, neither is the reader. So it's a good corner I painted them into, but help me get them out now, because I don't know how to get them out. So it's sort of fun to be able to challenge each other, help each other, push each other forward. So I think the result is better than a better novel than either of us could have written on our own. Will we return? Those that have read the Sanguinis trilogy, it is all resolved in the third book, but there is a little thread that's left hanging. And Rebecca and I have talked about picking up that thread and doing another cycle of stories in that universe. When we get to that, I don't know.
Oh, that's really good news. I'm sure your fans are all dying to know if you could do like 6 books a year. So we'll see how it works out. Any other question?
Kind of on a related topic, Tammy says, the first book of yours I read was Subterranean. It reminded me of 1950s military monster movies.
Oh yeah, definitely.
She says, I had so much fun reading it. Will you be writing any more standalone books like that?
Oh, definitely. I actually have like 3 different roughly outlined plots for standalone novels still. As soon as I can get them written, it's a challenge.
And let me add right now that Jim has his next Sigma Force book coming out in March. I don't have the exact date yet, but we'll be back doing this again.
It's March 9th, but it may not stick to that because they have a tendency to.
Right, things are moving around and so forth. But because you fans are so wonderful and buy so many copies of Jim's books, we work this out so that he comes here and we do this. And he has over 1,000 that he's signing for you today. So we probably only have time for another couple of questions if he's going to make his flight home.
I think
So
my,
Patrick, anything
wrist
else?
Just about relaxed from the first.
Yes,
first
I know. You needed a handbrake as well.
A few people have asked about Jake Ransom.
Jake Ransom.
He's probably 19 now.
Yeah,
He's in his 20s now, isn't he?
I had mentioned before that I was interviewing Christopher Paley, and I met him first at Comic-Con when Aragon first came out, and he was 19 at that point. He's now, in his 30s, so it was strange. Like, you're not Christopher. I remember you just being this skinny little guy.
Aragon was a great book too. Wow.
So again, I've actually written Cauldron of Doom, which is the 3rd book in the Jake Ransom series. But I want to do 4 and 5 because the problem of the middle school series is that they want to release them every 6 months, so that the reader of that novel doesn't sort of outgrow the series by the time you get it done. If you do 5 books, that's 5 years, and they may have outgrown that and no longer interested in finishing it. So I want to finish all 5 books in that series and then release them every 6 months.
All right. Here's a question. Linda Sanders writes, you do an awesome job bringing historical characters and events into your thrillers. It's obvious that you are inspired by history. Is there any... Oh boy, this is a tough one. Is there anything or anyone in current events that inspires you so much that you choose to do more research and write an entire novel about it?
Hi, Linda. That's so good. Linda has alpacas over there, so she sends me some alpacas on a regular basis. So modern historic, again, I've always got my antenna up, so and no writers, writes from thin air. We're always, looking at current events. I want my novels to feel topical. I want them, when you close the book, to be left with a little bit of something to think about. So, I'm always looking for not just the history, but also the story that's going to have that tie to something going on current today. Like Kingdom of Bones, my next Sigma novel. I pitched that idea to my publishing house like November of last year, and it's all about viruses. So come March, my editor says, did you, during your research, talking to all these virologists, did they tell you about this? Did they warn you that COVID was coming? And I said, no, they did not. I just was fascinated by viruses, because the book is not, Kingdom of Bones has got a bit of a pandemic element, but I don't consider it to be a viral pandemic novel. It's more about the weird evolution of biology of viruses. And initially I thought, wouldn't it be cool if that could have come out right now? But now I'm thinking, no, it probably just is not. It's going to scare the crap out of you when you find out exactly how weird viruses are and what threat they really pose. I don't know if that answers that question, but I'll tangent there.
Okay, here's Zachary asks, how different was your publishing journey for this anthology versus he says a more normal Sigma novel? Is this collection something that your publisher asked for, or was it a passion project that you had to pitch?
Again, it was more just fielding a bunch of questions from readers that were saying, where can I find the story, or is this a novel, or is, and a lot of them, they're out of print. You couldn't even find them in any format whatsoever. So I wanted basically initially just to offer it as like a chapbook, but I didn't realize how many short stories over the last 25 years I've actually written and tried to put them all together. And then they thought, this is long enough to be a full book. And then I wrote the introductions. Then I wrote the new novella that appears in the novel, just so I'm not just selling old work. There's a brand new. So it was 100 pages of my manuscript. I think I haven't counted how many pages it is in here. But it's about twice as long as any of the short stories in the collection.
Yeah, short stories are ephemeral by nature, and I think for any true fan to have a collection of them in a book is better than trying to chase them down all over the place. Anything else?
Want to do one more?
Sure, one more.
Okay. Betty asks, will there be any novels that continue the characters from Altar of Eden? I actually thought it would have been a great Sigma novel.
Altar of Eden features a female veterinarian as the main character. So again, it's the first time I had a veterinarian as the lead. It's funny that she asked that, because Kingdom of Bones, one of the main characters, is also a veterinarian, a wildlife veterinarian who's functions as a virus hunter out in the field. So I'm returning to another veterinarian character. So it's not Laura from Altar of Eden. Again, I always thought it would be fun to do another story with her, because she lives in New Orleans, but she's tied to a lot of the weirdness of New Orleans. New Orleans is sort of magical in and of itself, and you pair that up with the veterinarian scientist. There's just great stories to be told there. So I have not found a way into another story with her yet, but I'd love to, though.
Well, the great thing about Sigma is that you can actually bring all kinds of characters into it, even if it's for like a one-time, operation.
I'd like to, delve into the past and bring a character from like maybe one of the standalones, like Kowalski, that appears in Sigma. But there's been some other characters from some of my standalones that have helped out Sigma in
How about
various books.
Painter in Gray?
Painter in Gray.
Well, I got a question here from Kelsey saying, what's coming up for Painter in Gray?
Okay, so that's Kingdom of Bones. I don't want to tell you too much about it, because we're still got quite a leeway into that. But it's set in the Congo. It deals with the history tied to Prester John and the atrocities committed during the colonial period in the Congo, and what's going on currently in the Congo today. That's all I'm going to say. And viruses. Lots and lots of viruses.
Scary book, right? Good for March. So, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We need to crack a whip and get Jim back there to sign the rest of this 1,200 actually copies of this book. We do have these lovely signed copies, each with a doodle of the dog in it, and we think it's a great present, wonderful present for yourself. This video will play on our Facebook events page forever, and it will, we hope, turn into a decent podcast and also be posted on YouTube for people who don't want to watch it on Facebook. So feel free to share this with other let me try it again. Feel free to share that news with other James Rollins enthusiasts. And Jim, thank you. It's always a treat to be able to sit down and talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.